talk, they have to take a shot.
Oh, judging is going to get real interesting. No, you didn't talk about this before. I agree with you. What happened?
All right, so next, I want to welcome to the stage, this is from his bio, a man that once used Shmoocon Firetalks as to hitch a ride home to Knoxville. So, Travis.
Cool. Like
Travis Goodspeed.
Throw balls.
Save some money.
That was handy. I was here in DC, and I was enjoying like the ample space, and I thought, to hell with this, I want to go to Knoxville. So I politely asked the audience, and I hitched a ride all the way back to Knoxville, Tennessee. And then coming back to DC, I got stranded at Dulles Airport and said, this sucks, and I bought a car and drove back to Knoxville again. So it's like customary that if you have anything that comes from like a leaked classified document that you have to warn everybody to get out. I'm not doing that at the moment. I am saying, though, that I love China, and I'll get to that in a point. So today we're going to talk about the Tytera MD380. This is also sold under a couple of other brands like TYT or Renesas. As best I can figure, what they do is they spin up like as many different brands as they can, and then half of them get approved by the FCC, and the other half just get retired. So I like this radio because it's cheap. It's about $110 if you call Connect Systems, or for $140 you can get it with Amazon Prime delivered next day. Now,
how many of these are on the Brower list?
Are in the what? The Brower list. I don't know the Brower list. Yeah, the Brown list.
You shall not use these things.
Oh yeah, okay, so you're not allowed to use this at the federal level because of protocol compatibility reasons, but it's totally cool to use this at the local level. So like local police departments will use this, and I'll get to why that's fun in a minute.
So we can... what I got from that is we can all do this tomorrow because of Amazon Prime.
Yeah, well, day after tomorrow. So order these now. Like there's an 8 p.m. cutoff. So this device has about 1 megabyte of flash memory, and I'll get to how China gives us 1/5 of that back for free. It also has like 168 kilobytes of RAM, which is large enough to include an application. So for development, you don't even have to reflash the device. You can even load software over the radio interface if you were to write such features. It has an HRC5000 baseband, which implements Moto Turbo, or DMR, which is like Motorola's time slot TDMA handheld radio standard. It's like what truck drivers use, what like small town police departments use. University police love this equipment because you can buy the fancy Motorola infrastructure and then use the cheap Chinese radios to talk day to day. The protocol is 2-slot TDMA, so this is kind of like a poor man's GSM in that you can have a phone call at the same time that I'm having a phone call, but the third guy is shit out of luck. It uses 4 FSK modulation, which means that the baseband might be able to do P25 or other protocols. P25, you might remember I did some work with Matt Blaze and Sandy Clark, and we had this crazy little thing called Why Special Agent Johnny Still Can't Encrypt about all the mistakes in AppCode P25. All of those bugs apply to this platform almost without exception. It's also internationally trunked. So in all of these cities in America, you can call these other cities in America through your handheld radio, or you can even do international calls. Which is loads of fun because if you go on like the right frequency, then thousands of repeaters across the country light up, and you're killing more trees than the Republicans in Oklahoma. Now, normally, the first frustration about this radio is that it's programmed in a Windows application. And this Windows application is, do you remember when you wrote your first Visual Basic program and you didn't lay out like your form elements correctly, so when you hit tab it would just run to some random other part of the form? They do that. They also don't have the language settings right. So some of the error messages will be in Chinese, but it's like Windows XP localized to Chinese, which is not the same type of Chinese that Windows 10 understands. So you get gobbledygook in your error messages. So I used VMware to sniff the USB traffic, reverse engineered the process for reading and writing the radio settings. And then there's this lovely thing called CHIRP, which allows you to define the radio settings as C structures at start addresses. So I tell it here, for example, in this code example, that the contacts list has a 24-bit element called call ID, that it has 8 bits of flags and 32 bytes of names. It's actually 16, Unicode 16 characters, which, because like, yeah, China. And I tell it that this is located at 5F80. And that's it. It then knows that structure, and I just have to write the GUI code around it in order to load these channels. Or these contacts. So this is like different people that you know about. So there's a fellow named Mike in the audience. If Mike calls my radio, it shows his name and call sign on my radio because it knows his number. That's not enough, though, because you want code. Like, without controlling code, you don't really control anything that's fun. So I opened the radio up, and I looked at the model numbers. The radio baseband is the HRC 5000. This Chinese screenshot is from the manual for this, which I got from a site called Dockin. Dockin is the greatest site in China, because the way that Dockin works is that when you register, you get 1 yuan bean. And your 1 yuan bean can download 1 PDF document for free. But if you want more yuan beans, you have to upload documents that nobody else has. So you share your secret data sheets that you have under NDA with Dockin, and in exchange, they let you download the data sheets that you need to use your job. Kind of like file quotas in an old BBS. I love China. Now, from the rest of the board, we could see that it had an STM32F405, which is very standard American chip for the CPU, but we need the schematic diagrams. So the way that you get schematic diagrams is you write an email to the manufacturer, and you're like, hey, David said that I could have a copy of these. Could you please forward me the PDF? So we got the PDF. And there's a minor printing mistake, but I swear as we finish the printing thing. If you have the current issue of Pocket GTFO, the schematics are in the back. The next step is to control the code, right? Because now we know what CPU it's running, we know what radio it's running. We can begin to understand the code, but we need a copy of it. And unlike on a PC where you get an executable file for free, on an embedded system you need an exploit to drop out the code for you and give you a copy of it. The firmware updates are encrypted, of course. I'll get back to that in a minute. So to dump the bootloader, there's a pin, which in this photograph I've tapped out with a little red wire. And if you pull that pin high, you get access to a ROM bootloader. But the ROM bootloader is locked. It has readout device protection. So what I did was I realized that in the protocol where I'm talking to read the code plug out, that's the radio settings, the contacts, the frequencies, those sorts of things. If I don't enter programming mode, then it doesn't know to read from external memory, and it doesn't know where to load the buffer, and it skips a bunch of code, and it wounds up becoming a null pointer dereference. Now, on your Unix machine, if you read from address 0, that causes a crash. And in some extreme cases, these are exploitable. But you're not likely to do it blind. On an embedded system, however, lots of people are lazy, and they have flash code mapped to address 0, which in this case was the bootloader that does the decryption from the firmware updates.
It's actually in best practice.
So having a copy of the bootloader, I then looked up the manufacturer's recommended way to protect the chip, which is to have a function like this that has the byte 55 passed through it. And all it's doing is it's blowing like a fuse in flash memory, so that from then on, all of the software and JTAG debugging are arranged to prevent you from reading anything. So I disassembled the bootloader, and I found the write to that address, and I changed 1 byte from a 55 to an AA, and then I wrote that into a radio where I'd erased everything. When you erase everything, it assumes that there's nothing left to be protected, and it unlocks the whole machine. So what I do is I erase the entire device, so it becomes a brick. I then flash in the patched bootloader. So now the device is a blinking brick that can accept a new firmware update. And then I use the fancy tool with the Chinese error messages to install the encrypted firmware update, which gets decrypted as it's put into flash memory, and then I politely ask for a copy of it, which can be freely read because the bootloader was patched to disable the readout device protection. So now I have a complete copy of the firmware image. I then patched it. The patches allow for all sorts of nifty stuff. So I mentioned that this was used by like small town police departments, like university police. So hypothetically, if you wanted to listen to your local police department, what you would do is you would program in the frequency of it. And the frequencies are registered with the FCC and they're publicly available. There are websites that will give you a database of all the frequencies for your city, or your county, or your state, or even the whole country. The problem is that there is a 26-bit address, which is the address of the talk group. So in Tennessee, all of our amateur conversations are on 3147. But in other states, in amateur radio, you have a different number. For these small police departments, they're not published. So you don't know which numbers to program into your radio, and even if you did, that would only get you the public calls. Because private calls go to one individual address, and if you don't have that address, then your radio will see that there's traffic coming in, the light will turn green to say that it's a good signal, but none of the packets will be decoded, none of the audio will come out. So what you can do is you can go through the firmware and you can patch out the checks, so that if none of your receive addresses match, just to hell with it matching the first one. And you can go through the private matching and you can say, well, if it doesn't match, then you're wrong about it, pretend that it matched anyways. And then you get a complete audio for all of the public and private calls on that channel. You can also replace the startup logo. So, after the lightning talk tonight, I'll be publishing MD380 Shmoocon.bin, which any of you can publish, can write into your MD380 radio using the official updater tool without any hardware modifications of your own. It has been re-encrypted with the official key. We're still trying to figure out exactly what happened, but we think they were resetting a nonce or something. It turns out it's 512-bit XOR for the firmware updates. Kind thanks to DD4SCR for figuring that out. And yeah, so now we've got the first hardware scanner for the DMR protocol, which at the same time is, I think, one of the first HTs that you can now freely reflash with any code that you like. Thanks to the Chinese font, which is 200 kilobytes. It's 1/5 of memory dedicated to the Chinese font that can be replaced with a secondary operating system. We now have room to begin writing complete from scratch firmware with no commercial dependencies that can then later be ported to run on other handheld digital radios. Thank you kindly for your time and attention.
With the radio, and this doesn't really apply to anybody in this room, but does it come with a EULA, and are you violating that EULA by doing this?
So it's funny you should ask.
Other people outside the room might worry.
So one of the patches that you might do might be to so there's a USB vendor ID which you're supposed to buy. If we all pitched in just a couple of dollars, we could buy Tytera their own vendor ID so they could stop using the one from ST Microelectronics that they're stomping on. Your money's probably better spent with Hackers for Charity, but maybe we should pitch in. You'll also find, as you reverse engineer the firmware, that all of the USB networking code is copied from reference designs without bothering to change strings, and a lot of the exploitable bugs in those reference designs have carried over. So much so that the radio says that it's manufactured by ST Microelectronics because ST Microelectronics made the CPU and made the USB examples that were forked out. So if there are any intellectual property concerns, I think we can all agree that China is #1 and we have nothing to worry about. So we have a minute for questions, but I want a fast, funny question. If you have a long technical question, then you can catch me afterward, and I swear to God I won't run off in a huff and pretend that I have something more important to do. Yeah, you.
You want a beer?
I would love a beer. Do you have something hoppy?
That's a great question.
Good question. Good question.
Good question.
Be this guy. Thank you kindly.
Wow, great question, man. You might have a few more questions out there.
Oh, do we still have time?
You
Or?
might
we got
legitimately
Josh.
have a few questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
One more question.
One more question. Yes.
When can my local police department buy your firmware?
Leave the room, sir.
They can't. They're well. Okay, your local police department. Are they in China or the United States? Because it's like China #1, right?
United States.
Okay, they're welcome to a free copy. Like, it's 3 to 1 and all. I won't charge for it. I have better things to do than to nickel and dime people for weapons.